Do we want any coffee?
Nope, I'm
Okay, I
coffee
just,
free for a while.
all right, I just wanted to know if I need a
Deal
box.
sent me for Christmas that I just opened like 3 days ago. Coffee things in a nice coffee cup,
Yeah.
and they have these things called half cap
Oh,
in the Cory pods.
ah,
That's a pretty good idea, you know, for like evening. So we'll see whether I'm staying awake all night tonight after that. So.
That's what it is.
All right, distinguished Mr. Member of the school board, we're glad to have you here, Bob, and Madam Superintendent. I'd like to start with your presentation. This is who we're going to have, I think, at this point in time.
President Sandy Martinson is on the meeting. Back here in the
Back
room.
and see who's on Zoom real quick, Brian? Or on Teams?
Yes, and Genevieve Hollins.
Sandra and Genevieve.
And looks like Marjorie, yes.
Marjorie. All right, welcome, folks. Thanks for joining in. Can you hear us all right?
I can hear you. Good afternoon.
All right, great. Thank you.
All right, so yes, we have 3 members of the board here with us this evening. So, all right, well, I have a very short PowerPoint, and then I have a few, I'll run through the budget with you very quickly. I promised Glenn and Brian that I would endeavor for us to be completely done by 6:45, so you can actually have a little bit of a break before you start your regular meeting this evening. So, okay, so if you move to our first slide for me, Brian. Okay, so what you have presented for you is the 3rd draft of the budget, which will also be shared with the rest of the board and the public at our meeting tomorrow evening. And I'll just go briefly over the kind of some of the assumptions, kind of where we are. So our enrollment projections for next year are 693 students with the addition of 27 enrolled in extension. So we are seeing some recovery. We were actually above 700 during the count period, but it kind of does kind of go up and down a little bit. So we've seen a nice recovery from COVID. Our homeschooling population is actually up to 30. So as projected, some individuals that tried it during COVID decided that they would like to kind of stay with the homeschooling model, able to support those families as well. So the city appropriation at $3.2 million. This is a slight increase over last year, just to keep the city close at 3.15, which is about 87% of the cap. We are anticipating about a 10% increase to our insurance premiums. We also utilize AML-JIA like the city does. And since we do have a 3-year agreement with them, we know that we'll probably, the highest we'll see will be 10%. For information from NJOS, we're again budgeting a 2.5% increase to our utility budgets. And just please be aware that the amount that we've been paying for fuel this past year is almost double what it's been in prior years as well. We are making some adjustments in our staffing. Our COVID grants are ending. We had to put a few staff, not a whole lot, but we did have a few staff that were moved over to our COVID funding. The second bucket, ESSER 2, will end in September, and then we will just be left with the ESSER 3 grant. That about over half of that grant is being utilized for our phase 1 of our DDC control system upgrade work. That is getting close to an end here. We do have an increase in the indirect cost recovery from our grants. This is the amount that we're able to take out our grants and put back against our costs for the business office. And we are reducing our transfer to our capital improvement fund down to $100,000. We normally try to put about $400,000 there every year. However, with the we're anticipating this is based on flat funding. This budget is based on no increase to the VSA for next year, since we do not know what is going to happen in Juneau. So we always try to hope for the best and budget for the worst. Okay, next slide, please. So again, what are the bad news? Like I mentioned, continued increases in our projected fuel costs, increased by almost 50% for the last 2 years, increases in our liability and property insurance. That has also gone pretty close to doubling over the last 3 or 4 years. A lot of the COVID, a lot of other incidents just in general in the pool have started to push those property costs up, the liability costs and property repair costs up, also because of inflationary costs. Our certified negotiations are currently incomplete. We're a little bit of a stall. Our teachers are definitely feeling the pressure of rising costs here. So whether there be a homeowner or a renter, all of them feel that they need a significant increase in pay. And as I'll show you on one page of the budget, we are cutting deeper into our fund balance than we ever have before in order to balance our budget. We typically do pull a little bit of money every year out of savings, but this next year it's very, very, very deep in order just to get us to balance the budget if there's no increase whatsoever in the BSA. Okay, next slide, please. So what's some potential good news? Okay, education is obviously front and center in Juneau. Lots of conversations, various bills that are all somehow, many are just intertwined or touch education in many different ways. There's conversation about letting school districts potentially pool in with the state's healthcare system. There's pension reform conversations, the BSA itself, a lot of different conversations around how to fund education. Unfortunately, as if you've been following the news, it's become a little bit of a political football between some of our political parties in the two houses and our governor. So we are really uncertain whether we're going to get an increase to the BSA, which is truly what we want, because that is funding. Once it's increased, it's kind of like a raise. So you're going to have that money next year as well. Or what's now kind of being out there as kind of become a specter that's looming is the idea of one-time funding. I tell people that's like a bonus. It's great, you raise money, but that doesn't mean it's going to be there next year. So it's really difficult to really plan ahead and budget. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the roof replacement for Nome belts, we had to go back to the state and ask them for supplemental funding because what we were originally funded back in the fall of 2018 has now become due to inflation extremely insufficient to get the job done despite multiple attempts to bid out. We are seeing the roof situation is becoming a little bit more dire. We're seeing more evidences of leaks. We've had a few collapses here and there. So no major issues yet, but we don't know whether we're going to get. So we really, really, really need to get that roof redone. It's way past the end of its life. However, if they do fund the supplemental funding, which is number 9 on the state's list, they have to push down to about $30 million in capital funding for school improvement and major maintenance in order to hit that, to get ours in there. And I know that our legislators are working very, very hard to try to make sure we get that. The big challenge, though, is that's going to pull out almost half of our CIP fund as our participating share. So we've had some money stashed in there, knowing that we're working on a lot of projects to try to keep our buildings in good repair and maintained. So we're really going to chew into it if we do get funded. Okay, next slide. So some things that the city can do, I'm not asking for these, but there's just a couple things for you to think about is funding to the cap. There are many districts in the state of Alaska that give their maximum contribution to their school districts. One potential thing that we've been having to put out some extra money in is snow removal. You know, this winter especially has been very, very snowy. And we have one of our loaders is pretty darn old and it occasionally decides that it just wants to stop for a while. And we had one time where we had both of them went down in the middle of a big storm. And I do want to give public thanks to Glenn and Cole Cushman. And I literally called them and I said 911. We're trying to have school and we have people getting stuck getting out of the parking lot at Belts. And they came over and helped because both of our loaders went down at the same time. Also, the continued work on the new teacher housing complex will have a great input, a great deal of support because that's going to help us with our recruitment. It's always a conversation with people about housing. Usually the first things people don't ask for just even in the initial interview. So it is a challenge. So that's kind of a brief overview of things. And I'll give you a few questions, and I'll take a few questions if you have some. And I'd like to just point out a few things as we go over the actual budget itself for yourself, especially if this is your first time reviewing one of the school district's budgets. So are there any questions from any of the council members right now?
What's the percentage for the roof that the school has to fund?
We have to put in 30% of any project. The state will give us 70% of any major maintenance project. We have to give them the 30% as our participating share.
And what is that amount based on estimates for the roof project?
The roofs is probably going to be about $5.2 million total. The original allocation and the additional allocation if they get it. So our participating share total will be about 1.3 million.
And you have that.
We do have it.
available.
We do have it, but
In
it'll
CIP.
it'll drain about half of our CIP fund out.
Okay.
Okay, I think other questions can come up as we go through the.
Okay, I'm not going to go through the entire budget with you. It's 39 pages long. I don't have all of that time. But there are definitely a few things that I did want to point out to you as we go through. So on page III of the budget at the beginning there, just a few more details under the revenue projection there. So enrollment's projected at 693, like I mentioned before. We receive 90% of the BSA for our correspondent students, and that falls outside of the BSA formula that it goes through. There is currently a bill, we don't know if it's going to get any traction, to fund correspondent students at 100% of the BSA. We'll have to wait and see if that happens or not. We get what are called intensive needs students. These are special education students that have very, very high needs. They act as the equivalent of 13 students instead of 1 when they go into the formula. So we currently are projecting 16 based on our current enrollment and where everybody might move to next year. And then the rest of there goes through those are the cost differential factors. Okay? So our area cost differential is 1.45 times that of Anchorage. So that's what that formula gives us. We get 1.015 multiplied again because we have a CTE program. Our special needs students, we get 1.2 because we have special needs students. And currently the base student allocation itself is $5,960 per student, and then it runs through the formula, all gets multiplied out, and then that tells us how many students we will actually get funded on based on the count period. Yes, sir.
The House bill that is currently in the legislature for 175 million one-time funding,
One time.
what would that look like if it's passed as proposed? What would that look like to Nome Public Schools? I read an article that based on that, they'd probably increase the BSA, understanding it's a one-time increase, about $640, $660. What does that translate into in terms of gross funding for
About
20?
$1.7 million for Nome.
So if that passes, that 15.8 would be 1.7 million higher. You've got revenue projections up there, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, as I'll show you, we're pulling about $1.2 million out of our savings.
Yeah, I understand that. I just wanted to
Yep.
see if that was correct. So about 1.7 million. Okay.
Absolutely. And then, of course, we get impact aid, which is always kind of a wild guess what we're going to get from year to year. Those are individuals that have parents that are in active duty military, as well as people that reside on federal lands here within Nome and that can't be taxed. Okay, and then when we look at our expenditures, okay, we always have to look at our current staff, and then we look at who we know is leaving. We put in a placeholder for them, and we determine where everybody would be that are returning, making their step on the salary schedule per the negotiated agreement. We have projected a 2% increase to health insurance premium. We've been pretty lucky in that our rates increases when it comes to health insurance over the past several years have been relatively minimal. After 1 year, we've increased quite dramatically. It's calmed down a little bit. Again, the projected 10% increase in insurance. And again, our liabilities are close to status quo. We're kind of hoping and waiting to see we haven't quite got to the point where we start to get some dollar projections from NJOS. So we're hoping that it will be a little less this year, but it's still looking at $950,000 between our purchase price and drayage costs for that.
How much volume do you project in a given year?
How much what?
Volume. How many gallons?
Genevieve, what is it? We're about 190,000 gallons per year
I think it's
on average.
Correct, and this budget is for 200,000 gallons at $4.50.
For what?
450.
450?
Yeah, so, we look at usage, we look at projected inventory at the end of the year, and then we try to, decide exactly how much we want. We always try to walk the line between, we don't want to buy too much, and on the other hand, we don't want to buy too little. You make sure there's enough on hand if we get like.
That's about what you're using.
Cold snaps in April. Things like that, so.
Well, prices are a little better. Usually I give Jamie a price and say, use this. Well, this time I said, I'm not willing to to guess based on last time. But it certainly won't be any less. But prices, probably could be around $4 to you. I'm guessing based on what it is right now. But you still have, well, actually, I guess you buy it and expense it when you buy it. So you've already expensed the higher cost.
Of course, we all heard the OPEC cut production and oil's on the way back up.
Is
Good
it,
in many ways, but for the state, not so good for people still have to buy heating fuel and gasoline, so it gets you coming or going.
yeah, no, 450 seems pretty high as a fuel guy.
Last year when we
Even
locked
with the
in.
fuel prices they were, that still seems pretty high, and factoring in the drayage for sure.
Yeah, well, that's when we locked it in last year.
They're pretty close to what NJUS locked it in.
I think it was probably a little higher than NJ was.
You guys don't. Different.
Yeah, it was different. I mean, they locked in
Oh, so it's not the same price. I thought you just
no, not when they decided to lock it.
so you took the options
We
whether to fix.
we
or-
took that option for them and said, whatever you lock it at is what you're, because we would not have locked it at that.
I think the school district locked it in when the market was close to the highest. Right now, the last time I looked at barrel prices, and I know that we do not use the WTI here or Brent, but they were running in the low $80 range, which is about $35 or so, $40 less than last year. Because I think when I was looking at a report, fuel hit about $123 a barrel. Because we're doing the same thing as Jamie right now. We're trying to figure out what we think is going to be our estimate to put into the budget.
And I mean, in the school district and the school board's defense, the price was just ramping up gallon.
It was volume for sure.
Yeah, at every point there, and so they decided to lock them. Unfortunately, it did come down, and I really think that it's probably. I mean, it will be less this year unless things really go sky high or crazy, which they still can.
It's tough when it's volatile, so. All right, so at the elementary school, last year we had a position we were unable to fill, so that got removed from the budget because we had lapsing classes. That's back in the budget, of course, this year. We're adding a couple of education special ed teachers and reducing the number of paras. And for Anvil City Science Academy, the staffing level hasn't changed. We just have one teacher that's moving to partially covering special education. At the high school, the music teacher back in the budget, because that got taken out after the untimely departure of our teacher at the end of October. And then one position, there was a decision made that was previously in the our COVID funded. We decided to move it out of COVID funding and back into general funds. which is the behavior specialist position. We felt we really need that, given some of the increases in behaviors that we're seeing, especially at the middle school level. And then one of our counselors asked to go from full-time to half-time due to some family situations, and so that was granted. And then we took that half left over and the half from special education to look at another full-time middle high school position there that's needed. That will be needed, especially if we're unable to fill the music position, although we have a candidate on a hook and we're reeling them in, to add some art and some other special education support for students. So district-wide, due to the raise in the number of students in homeschooling, in the past it always averaged somewhere between 15 and 20, and now we're up to about 30. And so we had to increase the amount of work and pay for the extensions teacher for that increased load. Our human resources director is now an assistant superintendent for human resources. And then other than that, our transfer to food service and pupil transportation always remains status quo because we do not get enough of a refund from the state to cover all of our expenses. So we have to run some of that out of general funds every year and reducing the transfer. So that's just some of the overall things. So if you'll actually turn to page 1 of the budget, which is the revenue budget right there. Again, like I want to show you there, FY23 budget, that very last line there that says use of or addition to fund balance. So this year we're using $400,000 from our savings account in order to create a balanced budget. Next year, we're going to have to use triple that amount in order to get us to a balanced budget. So we're digging really deep into fund balance. Our fund balance at the end of that year is going to be lower than it's been in over a decade. So I tell people when we look at the things that are happening, when you see some of the other districts out in the state of Alaska talking about, deficit budgeting and things like that, we're probably about a year to 2 years behind that if there's no increase or change in the BSA.
And this budget assumes no increases.
Correct.
No increases to BSA, no one-time increases to funding.
But also, like I said, we have not concluded our negotiations with our certified staff either. So that's not built into this budget yet either.
Was that a scheduled increase?
No,
Or
it's
scheduled
we're
process?
negotiating.
Huh?
We're negotiating. So once we negotiate that, that will go into the new salary schedule.
Right, but is that part of like a semi-annual or a annual process? Or?
Annual. Well, typically, negotiations happens every 3 years, unless there is an agreement by both parties, the district and the teachers union, to have a shorter agreement term.
So it's been 3 years since we've done this?
Correct. Yes.
Any early projections in terms of where the negotiations might wind up?
We'll see. It's been a rougher negotiations than it has been in prior years, mainly because, like I said, the teachers are feeling a lot of financial pressure from everything that's happening in our the district. But as you can see, we don't have a lot to give. That's very challenging.
Any projections on what your turnover is going to be this year?
About 20%.
That in certificated staff, or
That's just certificated.
is that higher than normal or higher than, or is that pretty?
We're usually closer to 15.
20%?
In a really good world, we'd be about 5. 5 means everybody's happy, pays good, everything works well, because there's always people that are going to have personal circumstances or whatever that are going to cause them to leave, even when everyone's well paid and happy with their job and everything like that. That just happens. We have 3 longtime staff members retiring here, so that also does happen. But our staff longevity is getting shorter and shorter because a lot of our longtime staff members are starting to retire. So we don't have a whole lot of people, if you look about the past, at least since I've been here. So this is my, eighth year here in Nome. And, if you look at people that came in with, like when I was hired, I look at all the teachers there, and you have like 10 to 11 teachers, and now there's maybe 2 of those left. So it's a
Full-timer?
challenge. And the things that are most some people just express the need to leave education because it's been very tough to be a teacher. all through COVID, and then this past year has been difficult to be a teacher. There's a lot of unfortunate continued politicization of the school system, and teachers sometimes just don't want to be part of that. There is the conversation about how, both the cost of housing and the availability of housing is a challenge for many of our families. If we have a couple or someone that wants to start a family and some of them say, I have to go somewhere else because I can't find housing that will meet my needs for my family if I want to grow my family. We have some people that, this is a little odd, but pet-friendly housing is the worst thing to try to find in Nome. And we do have a lot of our folks when they come here, and that's actually what they talk. It's an outgrowth from the pandemic. When they had the pandemic, a lot of people were at home. The number of people actually adopted dogs and brought them, and pets brought them in their family increased. So we have a lot of people that are coming here. I really think almost every single person I think that we hired last year, about 75% of them brought a pet.
We got a call because we have a number of apartments, and we got, I think, one call from a teacher that was interested in, because we actually reserved some units for teachers based on our
Yeah.
conversation last year.
Yep.
One
And we
call-
will be reaching out
and
because
the one call was about pets. And we didn't have pets, and so.
Yep.
The question I've got is it availability of housing or is it cost of housing?
it's a combination. It really depends. And sometimes, it's also availability and location. Some of our folks, if they are working out at Belts and they're here in town, not only do they have to find an apartment, but they also have to find transportation. So, ideally, a perfect world, if we can get our new building built, then people that are working at the elementary school will probably be, more attracted to looking into the new building, while folks that work at Belts ACSA or the district office per se would be more interested in staying out there at the older Belts apartments, because, we do have some people that work at the high school and they love it because, they, some of them can kind of get away without a car if they, carpool with somebody and pay them gas money, or just, pay for a cab if they want to go into town on the weekends, but they can walk to work. So that's very attractive to people. But just generally, it's hard sometimes for people to come up here, have to find an apartment, have to put, $2,000 down as a security deposit, and then they also have to try to find a vehicle, especially if they come way down from the lower 48, and don't, they left their vehicle back in, Wisconsin or something.
I don't want to monopolize your presentation, but does it make sense for the district to lease housing for teachers to ensure availability for teachers, so you don't run into those issues? I know you already have some you own, but does it make sense to actually lease units?
Well, we could look at it. Part of it is, the reason that we're pushing hard on this is to try to find a way to have some things that are, below market rent, because we have people that said, I can't afford $2,000 a month for a one bedroom apartment. I'm one person. I'm a newer teacher. I'm making $58,000 a year. That's kind of a tough for people. Plus I have to pay for, all my electricity, and they have the heart attack when they walk to the grocery store for the first time, that type of thing.
How many people at the Belts apartment complex continuous 12-month renters as opposed to 9-month renters?
As opposed to non.
I'm just wondering, when somebody's not in school, are they still keeping an apartment and paying for it while it's vacant, or?
Yeah, so if they are, if their employment is tied to, the availability of the apartment is tied to employment with the district. So if they leave the district and nobody there is employed, then their lease ends at the end of the term and they have to move out. So we don't have people that are just renting there, quitting the district and staying in housing. So that does not happen. That's a clause in their lease. Most of us people, when they leave, they might ask to leave 1 month early, but that gives us time to get the apartment cleaned, painted, make any repairs if needed. And then leases start on July 1st. So we don't have a whole lot of vacancies over the summer. If people are leaving and they're, for the summer and traveling, they still are still responsible for paying rent on the apartment if they're coming back next year.
They're year-long leases?
They're 1-year leases, yes.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I shouldn't tell you this, but several years ago when we had something going on and we couldn't get housing, we actually subleased from somebody that was out there, while they were gone. And so that worked for both parties. We couldn't get anything anywhere else, and they didn't want to pay the rent. But I'm just wondering if we're leasing, space at, and you threw out 2,000 a month, so that's 24,000 a year. And if it's vacant potentially for a couple of months in there, then the effective rent in a month becomes higher.
Well, please let me know if you hear of anybody subleasing, because that's specifically prohibited.
Well, this was
That's why
like,
he said it.
this was like 15 or.
Well, that
15
could
years
very
ago.
well be. I know that years ago also, housing was obviously enough of a non-issue that we actually had, we rented some of the built apartments out to community members that were interested, not even in school employees, but that's kind of a thing in the past, so.
I was gonna ask you that, now it's all personnel, it's all school personnel there now.
Correct.
I remember when there used to
Everybody
be.
in there has to be certified, has to be a certified staff member. If we have anybody that's classified or whatever, then they have to have a certified roommate. And we're actually asking, some people are a little peeved at me right now because I told some of them that have larger apartments, but smaller people, that they're gonna have to look at accepting a roommate next year. They're not super happy with me, but, we're like, we have to start maximizing our district housing because we don't have very many people leaving the housing that we have next year, So we have less turnover in the apartment complex than we typically have in the past, because a lot of the people that are leaving this are not necessarily leaving Nome, or they're not in district housing.
Well, the city ends up having to rent a couple of places and the utility rents a place, just because, even if it sits vacant for, I'm gonna say 9 months on time during that 3 months that it gets used, the hotel bill would be much more than what's paid in annual rent. And so
Yeah, we've
So
never-
leasing might not be a bad option.
Can you remind us what the rents that you charge at Nome Health Park? Obviously, they're subsidized. What's the rents for the 2 and the 3 bedroom units?
A 3-bedroom unit is $14.75.
Well, that's subsidized big time.
Yes. Well, that doesn't stand out. I also haven't, I have not, don't tell anybody, but I haven't put out costs for next year yet. That hasn't been shared with people yet. But yes, that's, when people like to be in there, and then, if they're in there, they don't like to leave. Yeah, I know it's much below. And, the rents on the new building, if we do get it built, will not be quite that low. That's not realistic. Be brand new, it'll have some nice amenities, things like that. So, yeah, the rents will be higher on the new building.
But the idea with the new housing is still to subsidize your
Correct.
rents, so you can maybe keep a lid or keep pay.
Yeah.
What happens if you just, and I've thought about this question, what happens if you just increase pay? Where teachers can afford local rents or be able to better afford local rents? What would that look like? Would that blow your budget out of the water?
Increasing
Increase
pay.
pay, yeah.
Well, right now, like I said, we budget in about, they get about a 3% increase every year. But the conversation is that if we give everybody, so for example, we kind of kicked around the idea of, well, what if we gave somebody like a housing stipend? Some districts will do that. You don't live in our housing, we give you a housing stipend type of thing. But if we gave everybody, say, like $500 a month, we would, do we offer that just to teachers? What if we offer that, to classified staff? Because there's also the conversation of parity. So if we do that, then we're probably looking at $250,000 a year easy.
But would that be more cost effective than, say, having to subsidize and the operating expenses and so forth for, a big apartment? Would that make more financial sense?
It could, but it isn't necessarily, if scarcity is the problem, that doesn't necessarily solve that problem either. It might help people be able to afford something else. But, scarcity is still an issue. And the reason we're able to subsidize that is because we have no debt service any longer on that building. It's owned free and clear. Yeah, so basically, and a lot of the money that's going into our apartment fund right now is helping go towards the new building too.
Might I suggest that we put the housing topic on hold right now, get through the rest of it, and then if we have time, we can pick it back up, or we can have a different meeting on it.
Absolutely. Okay, if you flip over to page 3, which is our historical fund balance, you can kind of see, so the line that is in the dark blue is our limitation. So by policy, we do not drop below 5%. We have 2 different ways of calculating what 5% looks like, depending how we take in our prepaids, and there's some other things we can exclude. But you can see that for 2024, our fund balance projections is the lowest that it's been since 2015, which was just over $500,000. So, and we've gotten better, as you can see, with the 2 lines kind of meet together. That means that we're doing better at trimming our budget so that we don't have a whole lot of excess money that ends up falling in our fund balance at the end of the year. So, that's all our goal is to budget well so that we spend our money on behalf of our students and our staff. And we're not trying to stash anything away, but we always do have to have savings because of cash flow, reimbursables or grant reimbursables, which can be pretty hefty on a quarterly basis. So we have to upfront the money and then wait for the reimbursements to come back from deeds. So we need to make sure there's enough money in the bank to make payroll and pay our bills in a timely fashion. Okay, and then I'll take you over to page 5 of the budget. A lot of the conversation that happens, especially in the legislature, when they talk about how we're using our money, a lot of them ask, it's like, are we administratively heavy? And so this kind of shows you that 10% of our budget goes towards administration. But that includes basically everybody in our district office, our directors of special education, our technology director, our whole technology team, with the exception of one individual who also teaches. So our director of federal programs, human resources, myself, the principals, the assistant principals, those all come under administration. District office, if you look at the bar below, district office administration is only 2% of the entire budget. So we are not administratively heavy. 65% of our budget goes directly to students in the form of instruction. And then 2%, I'm sorry?
What is support? What kind of positions are listed as support?
Secretaries, like the special education secretary, your registrar, your attendance secretary. Also, the student support will also include our special education paraprofessionals, any other aides in the classroom. Those are all considered support positions. Okay. And as you can see, a large portion of our budget goes to maintenance and operations, and that includes our energy costs. If you flip all the way over to page 8, this kind of shows you that when we look at our personnel, that 70% of our personnel budget goes to certificated staff. Those are teachers that by law have to hold some type of a certificate from the state of Alaska. 30% of them are considered classified, which means they do not have to hold a certificate from the state of Alaska. So certificated includes administrators, teachers, counselors, and classified staff includes paraprofessionals, secretaries, etc. We have janitors, etc. So that's kind of our breakdown of where does our personnel costs fall into. So 70% of them are our teachers and our administrators. And then if you take a look at number 10, page 10, this is our facilities. So this kind of gives you a look at how old our various facilities are and how large our various facilities are. So of course, the Majority of the Belts campus is 60 years old at this point in time. So this is why we're starting to struggle with a lot of aging systems. We look back historically at some of the remodeling and things have been done. In some cases, I call the core systems of the building have not necessarily been upgraded. So there's electrical work to be done at the Belts campus. We're finding a lot of things that are out of code. And there's some plumbing work to be done at the Belts campus. The elementary school, which is only 35 years old, but its roof is now at the end of its life. So we're starting to see some persistent issues with roof leaks, et cetera. And if you recall, when it was built, they actually had to come back and redo the roof because there was some design flaws with the original roof. So a portion of it had to be rebuilt. So that's going to be the next major thing that we're going to work on, is have to order a roof condition study of the elementary roof, so we can look at that as another CIP project down the road. So you can see we've got a lot of space, and some of it's is pretty old.
So do you have too much space, I guess is the question.
Actually, really not. When you look at a big chunk of our Nome Belt space is given over to NITech. I mean, we have 3 full shops, which is really unusual. In many places, that's a little bit unusual. But it does allow us to offer, a very nice selection of both. We have the wood shop and the welding shop basically under our control. And we have teachers doing a great job in both construction and welding with the students. And then the third shop, which is the auto shop, is basically mostly utilized by NACTech. They house some of their flight simulators in that space as well. They take up a lot of space.
The only reason I asked that is that it was a community conscious decision many years ago here to stay at the Belts complex because they were going to get what we were eligible for replacement square footage was like a third of the thing. And so, I mean, obviously there's more operating costs with a larger space, but, I'd say, a new school in Nome is probably $50 or $60 million at minimum.
It'll be smaller.
Yeah. And, I mean, if for $60 million chunk, even though we have, a roof job and an electrical job and some of these other jobs, it's still, I mean, the cost of doing those enhancements to the thing are, don't pencil out to that same number. So, I mean, it's just, I guess, when something's 60 years old or 50 years old in here, it makes you pause to ask that question. But, I guess that place is pretty much built like a brick schoolhouse. And
Like I said, it's fairly solid. There are definitely some things that need to be, and they've worked on updating and upgrading it slowly over the years. So, if somebody just gave me $10 million, I could probably fix a lot of things and it would look really nice and last for probably another 60 years easily. So we're working on it as best we can, a little bit at a time, unfortunately. So we do what we can do given the circumstances. So other than that,
I bring that up because somebody else raised the question of, why is the school out there and why do we, why don't we get a new one in town? And so that was the reasoning at the time, and since that time, more of the spaces have been utilized because NACTech wasn't there, ASCA was not there, and the like. But okay, sorry. Now I got back on housing.
no, that's
Kind
fine.
of, sort of. So
Oh,
let's
you're
move,
fine,
let's move
John.
on.
I love your comments, and you've been here long enough. You always bring some nice historical perspective to someone like me who really hasn't been here all that long. I'm not going to go through the nitty gritty of the various site budgets. If you have any questions on any of those, please ask. So just so you have a chance to kind of take a look, if you could go all the way down to page 29. And this gives you kind of a historical perspective on enrollment in the school district. So we actually, at one point, the highest we've ever had during the count period. Remember, we have to count students that are enrolled for a 20-day count period, usually in October. So sometimes we may have more, sometimes we may have less. But the highest we had was back in FY16, where we had 732 students during the count period. And then we had a bit, so that was actually, but that was a bit of an anomaly, because if you look at the year before and the year after, they're more closer to 700. And then we were kind of on this nice little growth, and then you can see COVID, you can see the drops in the enrollment. And then where we are right now is bouncing back to 694. So we're not anywhere near the 732, but we're a lot closer to kind of what I consider more kind of where we were, the historical average of 700. So there's kind of a nice bounce back. But the red line there is the BSA, the base student allocation, the cost per student that goes into the formula. So you can kind of see, the fact that we've only grown $500 in the base student allocation since FY09. And so we got an increase, and then it was flat, and then we got a little increase, and then we've got that long flat line. So that's, imagine anybody not getting a raise for 6-7 years, and you don't have the ability to do a whole lot more when it comes to trying to find different ways to get creative and get revenue. So there are definitely some of our challenges there. And then the next page is a history of the city's contribution to the district since FY19. So the blue line always shows the maximum that is set, and the red bar, of course, is what the city has met. So if you can see historically where we've been, so back when FY19, you gave about 75%. And over the last couple of years, we've grown all the way up to about 86, 87%. So we are grateful to the city for guys stepping up and helping us out with increasing your contribution towards the school district. That has also helped in many cases stave off some cuts that we might have had to be making this year instead of potentially next year or the year after. So again, we do encourage the city to consider funding to the CAP, but we are grateful that our partnership has been strong and positive over the past several years. So I did want to thank you for that.
Quick question. How do you anticipate the port expansion affecting your enrollment?
That's difficult to tell, because I assume that if we have influx of personnel at the beginning for construction, probably the majority of them I'm guessing will likely be single men, or hopefully some individuals from our region itself working. But over time, as we start seeing, especially if we end up with Coast Guard presence, that type of thing, I anticipate that we would see more families. Now, we also have to see how much of that ends up being federal land. For example, if we have Coast Guard, end up with a Coast Guard port or something like that, or Coast Guard installation, that will bring us more impact aid, because that won't be non-taxable land. So we're kind of watching it guardedly. And if we do start to see, our enrollment starting to creep up as we go there, we will. There's room for expansion, although not a whole lot. So at some point in time, maybe we will be having a conversation about somewhere, but I don't know if that's going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So
Just curious, I thought we had more room than we needed. I thought that's what you were just saying at the school. How much room do we have for expansion?
we have some rooms that are being used like partly. I would say maybe 1 or 2 classrooms at the high school could potentially be better utilized. We could get rid of the hospitality room, could be turned full-time into things. We have some rooms that are used partly throughout the day. So those could expand out and become full-time. At the elementary school, because we lost 1 grade level that went to Belts, the 6th grade that went to Belts. It really kind of depends. We've moved around our cultural studies classrooms. We've moved around our special education in different places. So there's probably about the same, probably 1 or 2 classes that could be utilized differently. But like I said, there's some room to grow. But what always happens with the state is that they kind of make you wait until it's painful growth before they actually say, oh, yeah, okay, now we'll fund your school. And then you have to actually go get it funded, and then you have to wait and get it built.
We shouldn't have any problems accommodating whatever growth happens for the board.
I think we'll be okay in the near future. In the long term, it may necessitate some changes, whether that be adding on or building a new school. We'll have to see how that goes.
How do Nome salaries compare to the other school districts in Alaska?
How do Nome salaries compare? Well, a couple of years ago, in fact, the last time we went through negotiations, we worked really hard to try to bring them more in line with the other districts, same thing with our administrators, because we have to attract good administrators as well as good teachers. And so I thought we were kind of, oh, we're getting a lot closer, everything's looking real good, and then they went and increased theirs too. So, it is difficult also for us because the Northwest Arctic has a lot of villages, so those aren't, don't have any, they're just 100% of their funding goes into into Northwest Arctic. And the same thing with Bering Strait, because that is not a borough, it's an REA district. And North Slope, of course, they always have a lot of funding from their borough as well. So it's difficult for us to compete because we're also small. We're a single site district with 3 schools, so our pockets just aren't as deep. So it is a challenge for us, but I think we're comparable with some other districts of similar size and composition. So if you look at like we've done to Dillingham or something like that, I think Cordova, fairly similar. So just depends sometimes where people want to live and work sometimes.
Spots is higher than we
But
are.
other than that, I don't have anything else specifically to point out to you in the budget, but if there's any other questions that you might have.
I'd like to go back to who's on the line here, council members. Brian? So I guess actually we've got Adam.
Yeah, I don't have anything. Thanks for the
Okay.
presentation.
Okay, great, thank you. Sig didn't give you a chance to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things I could say, but I know we're short on time, but I really appreciate.
We'll take a little more time, go
Yeah,
ahead.
appreciate what you do and to the extent that we can consult with tribes, I think that's another opportunity. Maybe there's ways we can partner with funding. I know there is a tribal school coming down the pipeline. So I don't know how that'll interact with NPS or if that's been a discussion or anything. I'm just kind of on the fringes of that discussion. So yeah, I really hope that we can increase funding and I know teachers do a lot, being married to one who's unfortunately leaving. We've struggled with salary and one's got our own family potentially, and how does all of that factor in? It's tough on a teacher salary. I won't.
Cam?
I don't have anything now.
Doug? I think just the last question or comment, I guess, was you highlighted on the No Belt School and the counselor reduction. And then you touched briefly on the behavioral specialist. I guess from a couple of conversations I've had recently, it seems like maybe there need to be more behavioral specialists or counselors or something because there's a little bit of, I guess, people got spoiled, I think, during COVID and lost some of their manners, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, our the behavior specialist position went through a couple of different people. And so we have somebody in there right now that's great because there's somebody from the community and have a relationship with our families and all the kids. And that's actually really important. But I think our biggest challenge for our counselors as well has been the fact that we've been so short on substitute teachers that there's some days they're busily being subs. And so they're not available to work with, And so they kind of fulfill kind of a dual role. I mean, Aaron Brown, our high school counselor, of course, his number one function is making sure that, kids are in the right classes, meeting graduation requirements, getting prepared for whatever their post-secondary plans are. And then Ms. Treat, our middle school counselor, does a lot more work with kids that need some, emotional or mental support. A lot of what she does, and she's really good at it. But they work both together to try to help to support the mental health of our students. But it's just tough when they can't be there, especially when you have some kids in crisis and they need somebody to talk to. And your counselor is covering for a teacher that's out sick because we just don't have subs. I mean, some days we have 2 subs. We have 6 teachers out and 2 subs that are willing to come out there and work. I mean, you can kind of do the math. We got to figure out something to do with 4 other classes of kids. So, we've got somebody has to be in there and covering, but it impacts instruction. We've seen way too much of it this year. So I know our kids have gotten shortchanged on instruction. If we have somebody that's in there that, is trying to do that plus, other things, or we've got 2 groups of classes all stuffed into the library. How can you administer sub-plans for 2 or 3 different classes there? So it does impact instruction, the fact that we haven't had the substitutes that we need.
And is there a system, or could there be, or would one even be necessary to kind of interact with the Norton Sounds Behavioral Health Program?
Yeah, we're trying to work on that, ideally. I mean, if we had our druthers, we would be able to have somebody on campus at least a portion of the time. We try to do, we have to be very careful because we're not mental health specialists or anything like that. We make the information available to families if they want to reach out, but sometimes they're either waiting or it's a case of them trying to get their child over there. And if we had every approval and everything ready to go and the children could simply meet with behaviors on campus, even if it was just, for short periods, that would be really, really ideal because I think that we would see more students taking advantage of those needed services if transportation didn't end up kind of being an issue for some of our families, especially that work.
Well, I guess, thankfully, although our number is not 0, when it comes to suicides and the like, you hear about this in the villages much more. And, having those resources available, here perhaps is one of the factors why we have a low number. And certainly want to see that be 0, not just in our area, but everywhere. And so I guess that's kind of why I was, this thing about the counselors and mental health.
Try to pair with them. We work with also the camp does provide some things that do have some impacts on health and behavior as well.
Okay, Kelly, did you have any comments you wanted to make?
I agree with the point that we do need counselors. I don't really know the last time I saw Mr. Brown. He's stretched very thin and he does not have the resources that he needs, especially for the students that are leaving the school next year. I agree that the roof situation is getting worse. I do appreciate that presentation and I hope that the city can help with that in some way.
Scott?
Just one final question. Has the school district and the city ever looked at consolidating some services or combining services for cost efficiencies? And it struck me when you talked about snow removal. And you said that the city jumped in and kind of, you had some snow removal issues going on. I'm wondering if it makes sense because does it make sense to combine things, whether it's snow removal or maintenance or accounting? Have we ever looked at that to see if that makes sense? Again, maintaining the separation of the school district and the city as separate institutions, but does that make sense to consolidate some of these services to reduce costs?
We've had some conversations and we will continue to have conversations to look at what services, the back of the house services, as we refer to it, could be combined. Right now, we do not have anything that happened in this budget year, but the conversations, whether it's healthcare, which we've been talking about, or maintenance-related issues. And I will say that our cost for snow removal have gone through the roof this year because of what we've all been dealing with. And so, but yes, short answer is yes. And just so you also know, in the proposed budget that is still being worked on, it is going to be submitted to you that you allocate $3.2 million to the school district. So that's already being factored into the city's budget, which is less than a 2% increase from the previous year. And, you know, we've already, Jamie and I had extensive discussions before on this. So we try to maintain good conversation and communications with each other. So, but it's, you know, the allocation that I'm recommending is 3.2. You know, I know that, you know, watching what is happening down in Juneau is a little discouraging at times, but you know, the school district is going to probably have some substantial increases coming with a union contract. I mean, we've all been feeling the impact, whether it's Work's been raising salaries, the private industry has been raising salaries, the hospital, you know, their announcement that they're 200 positions short was absolutely astounding. And I'm trying to get up with Angie to discuss that more thoroughly so we can factor it into what we need to do.
What's our maximum allowable contribution?
I think it's about what,
3.4 something.
3.46.
It's like,
Right here.
okay, that number right there, okay.
So for FY '23, it was 3.46 million. So I don't have the projection in front of me for FY '24 for the max allowable. Genevieve, do you happen to have that handy? The maximum?
Yes, based on our budgeted enrollment, the max allowable is 3.7 for next year.
All right, well, if we don't have any further, want to thank the school board members that are on the Teams call and thank Bob for being here in the room. To back Jamie up, and thank you, Jamie, for your presentation. We appreciate the work you guys do.
Thank you. Thank you for the time in front of you.
Take just a couple minute break here, stretch your legs, and
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Make a motion.
I'll second.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Mark Johnson. There's no additions or deletions other than ministerial. A roll call, please, on their adoption.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Sequoia.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to communications now then. March 7th, memo from the city clerk regarding cleanup of King Island Native Community Block 70 lots. Mr. Clerk?
So basically, as the memo states, this should have been under a pilot agreement, but it wasn't under a pilot agreement by the time that the tax roll was released. And due to the confusion, they didn't appeal it, so it got caught a little bit later.
Hey, is there a motion to clean up the King Island Block 70 lots, tax lot 001.111.09 and .10?
I'll make the motion.
Second. Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Doug Johnson, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Piscoya.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. The next thing is simply, oh, no. We have a couple of applications for tax exemption that were received after February 1. For Russell Swanson, received the 29th, and St. Joseph Catholic Church for the 2nd of April. What are the wishes of the council with regard to these applications?
Make a motion to accept them as timely filed.
Second.
Thank you. Councilmember Mark Johnson, Councilmember Henderson, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Piscoya.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, under discussion that we just didn't have, is there a way for when somebody becomes a senior to not have to do this every year? I know we talked about this before, but, and I know the issue is, well, if their property changes, such as they go from a residence to a rental.
Residence to a rental, or somebody passes, or somebody moves out and then family member moves in. I've tried to cross-reference the people over 65 that get a PFD with our ownership, but it's not easy. It's not just an easy process as you're looking for.
I wonder how, like, I know my stepdad lives in Anchorage and he doesn't have to go in every year to apply. I wonder how they ever get that tax exemption. I wonder how they do that.
Just a staff of Anchorage.
Anyway, I know it's been brought up before, and I hear it once in a while from people who are, I gotta go in there every single year. And every year we seem to be, have to forgive some late ones, and so just make it easier, if it can make it easier on the staff as well. So,
Last year, I personally delivered paper copies, and we still have ones that were late.
Okay, budget calendar, then there's a flyer here with Child Abuse Prevention Month activities. Today was tomorrow is Library Story Hour. A race and meet and greet with first responders and Denim Day, etc. Thank Queric for putting this together. And then a copy of the development exemption advertisement or ordinance advertisement that was put in the paper.
Thank you for putting it in there.
This will run again probably this week. And we're trying to figure out how to put this together and put an ad maybe in the Alaska Daily News. You know, to let people know that this is, or some avenue down there, so.
That's the end of communications. On to citizens' comments. Are there members of the audience that would like to address the council this evening? No indication. You get an opportunity a little later in the agenda if you think of something. Moving us on to new business. With the indulgence of the council, I'm going to handle item E first, or ask that we handle item E first on page 79 of your packet. Mr. Clerk, would you read Resolution 230405 in its entirety?
R 230405, a resolution commending Michael Hahn for his prompt noticing and reporting of a fire in the Public Works building. Whereas on Saturday, March 11th, 2023, the Department of Public Works staff were making final preparations for the Iditarod finish a few days hence, and whereas at 3:30 p.m., Michael Hahn, a DPW staff member, noticed smoke coming out of the third floor of the Public Works building between 4th Avenue and Tobuck Alley, and whereas Mr. Hahn acted quickly, calling 911 and alerting the fire department to the fire, who quickly stopped the spray and contained the fire to the woodshop area. And whereas Mr. Hahn's quick actions helped prevent the destruction of the Public Works building, which would have amounted to millions of dollars in losses to the city of Nome, as well as cripple the Department of Public Works in fulfilling their duties to the citizens of Nome. Now therefore be it resolved that the Nome Common Council acknowledges and commends the efforts of Michael Hahn and extends to him the gratitude of a grateful community.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 230405?
Move that motion.
Councilmember Piscoya was first. Councilmember Mark Johnson was second. Mr. Hahn is in the audience and with his family, and we'll be voting on this resolution here in just a second. But certainly your actions as depicted or described in this resolution did save the community from a big catastrophe that could have occurred, and fast action is the only thing in your alertness to the situation at hand. And so definitely we're grateful, and we will formally vote. Does anybody else wish to speak to this?
Could we get him up here with a handshake with the mayor?
We will after we do
If
the,
we pass it?
yeah.
In case you don't. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to add one thing. Mr. Hahn had not taken the effort to notice and smell that there was a problem and to explore where the problem was happening. And going upstairs and locating the fire and taking the action he did, as it's been noted. This could have gone on burned for a longer period of time. Even, we've all discussed what would have happened if this fire had happened at night. But if anybody's been up to see the damage on the third floor and how intense that fire was, we were extremely lucky that it was caught even then. So I just want to add that into the record.
Thank you. There are no other questions. Can we have a roll call, please, on the adoption of Resolution 230405?
Councilmember Topcock. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Piscoya.
Yes.
Motion carries.
And with that, it was unanimous. Come on up.
Bring your families.
Take from me.
Bring your family up. Come on.
Oops.
Yeah.
That was a scary thing. Great, thank you. Council members, come around as well, please. It's all right, you don't need to. All right. Mark, we want you in here too. Need somebody else to do that? All right, Brian, we'll add the city seal to this. But we'll put it in here for ceremonial purposes. Yes, there it is. I'm gonna mess it up. I'm gonna let somebody else take care of that. Yeah.
Pretty sure I can fix that.
Right, all right.
Tighten it up, tighten it up.
Tighten it up.
Yeah, tighten it up, okay. Come on in, Sig and Kelly, why don't you get here in front? Like that. And maybe we can have you come out just in front a little bit.
Stand in front of me.
All right, perfect. All right. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Job well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. We'll just give it back to Brian. Unless you want to take it with you. He can do it again. All right. We'll go back up the agenda then to Resolution 230401. Mr. Clerk, would you read that by title?
R 230401, a resolution recognizing April 2023 as Child Abuse Prevention Awareness Month.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 230401?
I'll make the motion.
Councilman Henderson, Councilman Doug Johnson, discussion? This is actually a national thing. And Nome is joining. Roll call, please.
Mayor?
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, this is just, I'm assuming this means we haven't done this before, like recognizing April is,
No, we did it last year.
we did it last, so we do this every year.
Not necessarily.
We started last year.
Okay, we started last year, but, so some things we don't do resolutions for every year, but some things we do. I'm just trying to figure out, because I know we've done IPD, we've done MMIW,
If they're requested.
if they're requested, so it's, okay, on request every, okay.
Somebody's got to bring it to our attention. Brian has plenty of other stuff than to keep track of the
I just
Hallmark
didn't know if
calendar.
it's just like carry forward.
Yeah, no.
Just so you know, Quirk approached us. You know, and since we did it last year, we think it's important enough, that's why we did it by resolution. And, you know, unfortunately, the person who represents Quirk could not be here tonight. And I thought we should do it early enough in the month versus doing it at the very end of the month.
And did we vote? Roll call, please, if there's not, oh, that's right, that's what sorry, I didn't mean, for my glasses, I can't see. No. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson. Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Piscoya.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcott. Motion carries.
Further, resolution 230402.
2402 by title, please?
R 230402, a resolution designating Charles Chip Weaver as acting city manager for April 26, 2023 to May 6, 2023.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 230402?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Topcon. Any discussion? Have a good time. Roll call, please.
Well, I may be going to college for 3D housing now. I just found
Oh,
that out
okay.
after I scheduled my vacation.
All right, well, if the dates change, we'll line them out and change them. The roll call, please, on the adoption of the resolution.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Piscoya.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. That then brings us to resolution 230403.
R 230403, a resolution of the city of Nome to apply for and participate in the U.S. DOT PIDP discretionary grant program for funding the Port of Nome Arctic Deep Draft Port expanded marine utility construction.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 230403?
I'll make that motion.
Councilmember Mark Johnson, Councilmember Doug Johnson. There is a descriptor that goes along with the grant request, and have council members have had a chance to review it. Do you have any questions? Please, on the adoption.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Piscoya.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. That brings us to resolution 230404. Mr. Clerk, by title?
R 230404, a resolution authorizing staff to put out a bid for the maintenance and upgrades to the heating and ventilation system for City Hall.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 230404?
Motion.
Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Doug Johnson. Mr. Manager, if there are any questions, we've discussed this before.
We are looking at using the $1.1 million in ARP funds that are available, ARPA funds, I should say, are available. And then we're gonna start working on the more complicated on the rec center, which is still under design.
Are we comfortable that 1.1 million is gonna be sufficient?
I'd like to say yes, I'm hoping, but as anybody knows, the market is crazy, and the ability to get the equipment supply chain, we're still waiting, for instance, which is a locked-in price for the alarm system at XYZ building, and they were supposed to be installing it now, and it's not happening. So, you know, council member, I am really hoping that it comes in, hopefully even under price, but I'm not gonna make any guarantees at this point.
If it goes over, it'll come out of the general fund, correct?
We'll have to discuss it at that point, if you wanna move forward. No bid will be awarded without your approval.
Are there any other questions? Roll call, please, on the adoption of resolution 230404.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Piscoya.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to utilities, Mr. Morton.
Good evening, Ken Morton on behalf of Nome Utility System. Pretty brief report. Overhaul for generator number 16 starts 2 weeks from today, so just about all the materials are in. Line crew's gonna start taking down parts of the Rock Creek feeder. It's obviously been in pretty poor shape for quite a few years. We'll salvage what we can, but I'm expecting a good part of the cable to end up in the dumpster. Well, it'll be recycled. Posted a couple of recruitment opportunities for a CFO for the utility and also for an operations manager. Excited about that. Anybody has any ideas? Please encourage them to reach out. On the NSEDC side, the energy credit, the subsidy that they're providing, $575 per head. We had 1,063 applicants for a total of a little over $611,000, which is just awesome. It's worth noting that the last time that we did this, we had about 50 more applicants. Despite, folks coming in on the weekend and calling 300 numbers, we ended up with less than what we had last year. But still, it's a really good thing for the community. Any questions about this or anything else utility?
Wait till you're done. No, I was waiting till you're finished. I was just curious on the CFO position. Is that something that could potentially be done remotely if you're unable to locate somebody locally? Obviously, that's first option, but.
You're looking, that discussion happened at the last utility board meeting, yes. So, yes, we prefer local.
School does.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to NSEDC. Next question, I guess I'll just follow up on that one, is people will say, when do I get it? Well, the application period was in March. They finished, are working here on finishing the agreement here at the end of April. And while we have projected it would be done till May, it's probably a little later this month, so folks will see it on April accounts. City manager report, Mr. Manager.
I would like to talk a little bit about assessments, the joyful greeting that was sent out by the city clerk. I have been forwarded various comments on Facebook pages. Yes, the assessment went up substantially, which, depending on your view, if I'm a property owner, I'm probably happy to see my property go up in value, though I don't want to be paying a tax bill that's related to that. The city, this is just an assessment. Obviously, we have not come to you as the elected body to recommend a tax rate, but I will tell you that it's not going to be at a 12 mil rate right now. So we are looking at that. I think this, and a lot of people don't understand, well, I didn't do any improvements to my property. Well, your property has also been impacted by inflation. And inflation obviously has hit Nome hard. And then we're seeing the cost of constructing a house or even the sale of houses is having, the values have gone up. So, and I know that the board of, I keep wanting to call it adjustment.
Equalization.
We're anticipating a good turnout. And hopefully, if people do disagree, they take advantage of talking to the assessment company to see if that can be addressed before the Board of Equalization meets. We're looking, it was expressed to me that, we are now at 3 months looking at the impact of the MOU that was put into place to limit alcohol sales on Sunday. And it was discussed that we would have a meeting at 3 months. And a couple council members expressed an interest in being involved. So I don't know how you as the board, as the council want to handle that. Do you want to have, one person? Do you want to designate one person or?
This is just a meeting between the two,
The two companies, the managers. I mean, I'm sure their lawyers will be there. And then the two managers, I've already spoken to one of the managers and I gotta see where the other manager, if they'll be available the last week of April.
I assume the council members aren't there to really be part of the conversation. They're just simply there to observe.
To observe, I mean, right, basically, you know, it's to say, okay, what is work, what is not work? You know, what can be done? We already know that, Sunday is the calmest day of the week for both the police department and Nest. For Nest, Sunday night is the quietest night that they have. The police department has told me that they are averaging maybe one person on Sundays now versus taking 3 people up to the hospital. But other things have also changed since this. You know, we've gotten an agreement with Nest and the day shelter to overlap, which I know is probably also helping, and I want to make sure that there is no one issue, one piece. This is a multi-piece puzzle, and we're just trying to figure out what piece is working and what piece isn't, and what changes are made to it. So, I can say that from my conversations, when I've seen the managers, they're both sharing information, which was critical, so that if they have an abusive customer or someone that they catch running alcohol, you know, that is being addressed. And I also want to clarify one thing, because it was brought up to me by the media. People can buy one bottle at an establishment. It doesn't mean they can't buy more than one bottle a day. They can go from here over to, you know, over from AC's Commercial across the street, a quick stop, and they can go up to Hanson's and buy a bottle. And the other action that we took, which was limiting the small containers, which you call shooters on the East Coast where I'm from, we call them miniatures, and a lot of communities are starting to do that. It's not the small bottles of alcohol sales. In fact, in Boston, that's the largest community I'm aware of, and an article was just out on that. So the goal is really just to review, develop, as we were working on a matrix to see what is working.
Sure, I'd be interested in attending.
So just to clarify, the city has not designated any regulations or rules or ordinances pertaining to this with the two stores getting together.
This is an MOU that the city was a little involved in
I
these
understand.
discussions. I mean, I don't want anybody to think it wasn't. But it was also involving AMCO. You know, they wanted us to resolve this issue on a local basis. And then they were copied with what was agreed to by the two stores in this, and the city was signed the agreement too. And this agreement, by the way, is very similar to a lot of agreements that is down in Anchorage in particular. And so far, it seems to be working. Obviously, with the change of weather, we'll see what happens after that. And, you know, as I said, it's going to take us a full year to really understand and how this is working.
Will a report go back to the rest of the council?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm not, you know, we're gonna,
Okay.
you know,
I
I'm
assume
not gonna
so.
write it, but.
I mean, I you know, it's just gonna say, you will get in my manager's notes probably the first meeting in May on how this is working. And is there anything else that we can do at this point?
Before you go on, just to, under the assessments, I know we have a short window of time for appeal, but can we clarify when somebody has to get an appeal in if they want to appeal their assessment?
Mr. Clark?
Friday, April 28th, close of business.
Okay. So if anybody has a disparity, if they want to appeal it, they have to get the appeal in by Friday, April 28th.
That's correct.
Okay.
We'll try to get news out on that, so.
I know last year, I think it's right around the Board of Equalization time, we had that work session where the assessor came and kind of explained it. And and there was a handout that he gave, and I've actually handed that out to a couple of different folks that have expressed concerns about it. It's actually explains pretty well a lot of differences between like the fee appraisal process and the public assessment process. And I'm just wondering, does it make sense, or does the council want to do that again, instead, seeing how there's been a lot of interest in this topic here in the last week or two? To have, in addition to, meeting with property owners on individual issues, does it make sense, or would the council be interested in having another public information meeting just to kind of, so anybody is interested in it now that the assessment notices have come out?
How about we put that document on the website so people can grab it?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw it out there because
I will go ahead and create an ad in the paper so people can see it, where they can attach to. I just want to remind everybody, city staff has no involvement in the assessment. This is done by an outside third-party organization that does it. So I've seen a couple of conspiracy theories on Facebook that have been sent to me, and the city staff has nothing to do with this. It is done by a third party.
yeah, whatever we can do to get information out there. If there's not an interest in a work session, certainly having available documentation online.
So if we post that online, could we send a link directly to it through Nome Notes? Sometimes it's a little difficult to find things in the city website if you don't know where to look.
You mentioned that having residents take an opportunity to meet with the assessment company. How would they go about doing that?
There again, they have an opportunity, don't they, if I remember, Brian, to call them and discuss their assessment beforehand.
Normally the process works is that people appeal, and then the assessors will try to work out, come to an understanding on the value between the assessor and the property owner. And if they can't come to an agreement, then the city council sits as the Board of Equalization to adjudicate. That's how it normally
And who is the assessing company?
Appraisal Company of Alaska.
People should fill in not complaint, but
Appeal.
the appeal form, filed out with the city clerk, and that will ensure that they will make contact as opposed to the appellant having to contact them.
Perfect.
And I would encourage anybody, if they're interested in going through the, any concerns at all, to go through that appeals process. There's a little paperwork. And speaking to personally, I've done that. And although I didn't get all of what I wanted, I got some of what I wanted. And I would encourage anybody that had any concerns about the assessments to go through that appeal process, because that's what we pay the assessor for. Is not just to give a number, but also to go through the appeals process. So just want to encourage people to do that. If they have any questions at all about it, to go through that, because more often than not, the assessor, will be flexible, I guess. So
I guess not to say that we can't have the assessor come up, but don't put it in the minutes that he's kind of dry. And I suspect that the folks that have the questions are not the one. Well, a couple of them might show up at the meeting, but
fair enough.
I think that certainly get a hold of Brian if they have direct and maybe like filing the appeal application just gets you your foot in the door.
Get watching audience.
If one has misplaced their tax assessment, where might they find that?
Let me know and I'll send you a copy.
To the office.
I am that person.
The adjuster will be in Nome again on to assess the damages because they are, have it, way we're insured through JIA. This is going to the stop loss adjuster. So they will be in tomorrow. Also, how does the council wish to, or when the council wish to discuss the issue of vaping and the sale of cartridges and everything else? This was raised. Council Johnson, based on some activities out at the school. And you do have some ability to control it or even allow importation into that. I would definitely have our our solicitor available for this discussion, but I've had conversations with AMCO on this. So right now you're going into a heavy budget season, and our budget is not any prettier than anybody else's at this point. So I just leave that with you, that you do have the authority at this point to regulate.
Wonder if there are other communities that have regulation in Alaska? Maybe Brooks knows that, or his office.
Well, I will ask Brooks and I'll ask Joan from AMCO.
I don't know about Alaska, but I know that nationwide, there's a number of communities that have chosen to do that. My concern is because of the uptick, what I understand from talking to school personnel and knowing a couple of the kids that were involved, just only a few of them, but I understand there's uptick in use of vaping cartridges and the effect of kids at the school. And it's across the section of all the kids in the school. It's not just like a certain group of kids or whatever else. And so that's mainly my concern. I think the police maybe have had additional trips out to the school that were regarding marijuana and the vaping. And that's what came to my attention, because when kids end up in the hospital because of vaping, then that's something we should really take a look at.
Ms. Miller, do you have any comments or observations with regard to this subject?
I do think it's gone down, the issue at the school at least, with the installation of the vape detectors. But I do definitely think there's still an underlying issue within the community, and just like you said, it's not just one specific group of people, it's a lot of kids that are getting involved, especially the younger ones that really we don't know how they're getting a hold of them, and how they don't realize how it's affecting them. So I do agree that there's an issue in that it can be regulated.
Thank you. Let's not punt this too far down the road, but maybe, I guess I was suggesting if there was somewhere in Alaska that already had it, being Alaska has, so that we're following Alaska statutes and, the Alaska Constitution is that we have a whole lot of rights under our Constitution that, it would be good to have, if there is an example in the state. Not that we can't draw a council member on outside, but we might check that first.
Also, which I did not mention, the Christmas tree was probably damaged in the fire from smoke and everything else. So we may be replacing a tree this year. We'll have more information on that.
I thought you were talking about Leela's tree, but it looks fine to me. You're talking about the one up.
Yeah, one at Old St. Joe's may not have made it through.
Yeah, well, all those things that were stored in there, that needs to be part of the insurance claim.
It's a new tree too, right?
No,
No, Norton Sound gave it to us
okay.
years ago.
It was shedding like a real tree, though. And one of the things, you know, is we're trying to control the budget. And you have, and I'm going to let you go through the reports. We are looking at trying, we have a plan to move the storage from where we've traditionally had it at the rec center down onto the main floor by creating a new opening going out the building for emergency exit, and then blocking off some doors permanently where the material could be stored, and I think would add some life to it from having to drag it off the second floor areas. And we're also looking at the possibility of needing to replace the structures that we bring out for seating for people. Bleachers are reaching the end of their life, so we are also looking at that. But you know, hopefully next year's budget will still allow us to keep on moving and doing things in-house, which is, I think, saved the city hundreds of thousands of dollars overall instead of having to outsource it. So you also have all the department heads, I think, got all their information in for your review. And I want to acknowledge Cole had a number in there that is actually now 3,600 truckloads higher, which is over 10,200 truckloads of snow that has been moved within the community to prepare for the great melt that's going to come sooner or later. So if you have any questions.
You guarantee that, Glenn?
Well, you know, Mayor, let me tell you, I told someone today, in every city that I knew of, the mayors were responsible for the weather. So it is now on your plate.
I see, okay, all right, well, I better do something about it soon.
Because it is getting a little tiresome of 21 and 20 degrees below zero in April.
Yep.
Spring flowers ain't coming anytime soon.
All right, well, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Glenn, but is there anything further on?
No, sir.
Okay. Questions for the city manager? Okay, we'll move on then to citizens' comments. Second session, are there others in the audience that would like to address the council this evening?
I'm speaking on behalf of the Nome Kennel Club. And I would like to thank Cole, as we're just talking about that, to assist us to have the snow removed in front of the race start at the snow dump. And without that, we could have not had those series of successful races. The last we finished yesterday. And we enjoy that cold weather. Thank you. So a shout out to Cole and his crew because they were awesome, responsive, and awfully polite and nice as we added more work to their already substantial workload.
Well, people enjoyed the races, so that's good. Just for the recording, that was Deanna Hanker speaking. All right, are there others? Seeing none, move on then to roll call, please, for council member comments.
Councilmember Piscoya.
No comments, thank you.
Councilmember Tapcock.
Had the opportunity to go to the National League of Cities Congressional Cities Conference, was great. Worked with a number of other Indigenous elected officials to start a new constituency group, so we got formally recognized, which was really exciting. And then had the opportunity to meet with Murkowski, Sullivan, and Peltola. Sullivan, it was just his staff, but we did actually get to meet with Murkowski and Peltola herself for a little bit. It was March Madness, so there was a lot of chaos going on, but they're a plug for city projects, and I think they were well received. They have a lot of love for Nome and asked to pass that along. That's all I have.
Great, thank you. And did you get to see the cherry blossoms?
I did indeed.
Every time I've gone, I've missed those. So.
That was my first time, so.
Cool. All right, thank you, Councilmember. Next.
Youth Representative Miller.
I don't have anything.
Thank you.
Councilmember Henderson.
Probably similar to other council members, I did get a few calls this past week regarding property assessments and the surprise of how fast and how quickly valuations have gone up. And, I've tried to explain, kind of the technical side of the of assessments, but I think the general consensus of property owners in Nome are that this is a very significant increase, and that we need to be as a council looking at where our budget is. This is my second year, I think, going through the budget process, and I will be asking a lot of questions and a lot of details. And can we do this better? Can we do it more efficient? Can we do it more cost effectively? And I think there is a general expectation too that, since property assessments have increased so quickly, that the mill rate needs to be reduced. And I'm glad to hear, Glenn, that, you're looking at putting a budget together that is asking for a lower mill rate than we currently have. So one of the questions I did have is, do we have anywhere we can look to see what the history of the mill rate is? In terms of, I think we've actually seen something, but I'm just curious. I think it's been at 12 mills for a while. I think it used to be 14.
Well, when I first came here, I can tell you my 4-year history, it was 13 mills. The council decided to lower it to 12 mills. But I also want to make sure everybody keeps in mind, we also, we've had an inflationary rate that has helped the sales tax. How much of that's going to continue to help, I don't know, and we're looking at those numbers. We also, took out the seasonal tax, which was a $1.1 million hit. That alone represents, under the new value of a mill, about 2 mills plus, just a slight plus. And this is not the time to get into this, frankly, because we haven't even presented the budget, but it's a challenging year. And we're, from the staff, we are very sensitive to what, the impact is to the taxpayers of the city and trying to provide top-notch services to the citizens of that. And that's our guiding point.
Just wanted to set the stage. Thank you, Glenn. And by the way, thank you for getting the advertisement out on the property tax exemptions for housing. Appreciate it. That's all I've got. Thanks.
Councilmember Doug Johnson. Councilmember Mark Johnson.
I just wanted to remind the city manager that when we reduced the summer, when the citizens, I think, voted on it, right?
Yes, that was the citizens.
Yeah, citizens voted on it to reduce the summer sales tax. We also picked up sales tax in the last few years on pot shops and especially on Amazon. So we kind of had an offsetting thing, I think, by those two additional sources. In addition to, unfortunately, the price of fuel and all the rest that goes along with that, with goods and freight and everything else. I think the city will be the beneficiary of that. But I also got quite a few people stopping by my office because they have kind of an open door. And unlike Councilman Henderson, who said they had some concerns, they were probably like Bryant and Brad get down at the city office a little bit more than concerns. People were really upset with their increases. And I think it's just the amount of the increase was like what really, most people said, I understand that things may increase a little bit, but it was just overall a really, really great increase, it seemed like this year. I know my particular property, which I rarely ever look at those assessments, figuring that my particular property that we now live in and have my office there went up 28% or $62,000. That's a big increase, and I think a lot of other people are feeling that thing too. So I would encourage people to at least check their assessments and if they have any issues with it, to file the appeal and talk about it. I also want to commend the city and the staff for putting out that advertisement. I thought it was done really well, and encouraging people to consider investing in Nome and what some incentives might be. I thought that was wheels of government move slowly, but it's nice to see that advertisement. If we can continue that, I think that will help in the long run. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Councilmember Martinson.
I don't have anything.
That was I have none, or?
He's on mute.
Sorry, yeah, I don't have anything. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. Just a couple of things to talk about. Arctic Encounter Convention was going on here a week or so ago in Anchorage. About 800 participants from all over the Arctic, including Greenland, I believe it was, that we had the ambassador here in Nome. And on their way to the Arctic Encounter Summit. There are lots of good presentations by various folks from Nome. And I want to call out Josh Gannon for making a presentation down there that was as I heard it. I didn't actually get to go because I was on my way back to Nome, but it was a very powerful presentation. Saw a couple of Nome Eskimo dancers that were up there at the opening ceremony. And it was great just to be able to visit with people that have an association with Nome, either former residents or the like. I think it was a time well spent. In addition, had an opportunity then to meet some of the upper echelon in HUD that was there, and got some information from them on the potential of a large-scale housing development through a program with where you actually have a developer who gets the benefits from tax credits, and they were talking 50 or 100 units potentially. Those were not too big numbers to be considered. They make the development more attractive to investors. So we'll continue to try to beat the bushes and find out a little bit more on that. Red Cross people were here in town here a week ago, and they're having a statewide convention or something here middle of May, and have a nominee for, they have this Heroes program that they're doing, and they're going to be including a nominee from Nome for work associated with Hurricane Rafa. So 16th, I'm going to go down and present on that behalf. And I just want to say happy birthday to Nome yesterday. I'm not sure which birthday it actually was, but it's a ton of them. And April 9th is 122. Okay, our 122nd birthday of incorporation was yesterday. Don't have anything else with that, and unless there's anything else, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you. The time is 8:07. Thank you, Glenn.
No problem, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ryan. You have to call me back. So 15th and 17th.
Great.